Welcome, everyone. I'm Joanna Santa Barbara, the co-chair of Nelson Tasman Climate Forum, and I'll begin with the karakia. Kia tau mai te maramatanga. Kia tau mai te rangimarie. Kia tau mai te kaha me te aroha. Mō tēnei kaupapa. Haumi e, hui e, taiki e. And that is just applying the ideas of understanding, peacefulness, strength, and love for the agenda that we're about to address. Let's join together and be one. So it is my pleasure then to introduce our speaker, Des Casey. And I'll tell you a little bit about Des because the course of his life is quite relevant to what Des will have to say shortly. Des grew up on a small sheep farm in South Canterbury, and for his first 12 years, Des describes his daily instruction from parents after school as go outside and play, which he did. And that thus began his love for the natural world. And this is worth mentioning because it's possible it's not what most children do these days after school, which is a matter worthy of thought. Des has experienced an unusually large range of careers, which is highly relevant to the matters addressed in this meeting. He's been a welder, a truck driver, a crane operator, a journalist, all followed by a 40-year career in mental health as a counselor, family therapist, mediator, and facilitator. Des's concerns turned to the world of nature, and he expanded his understanding of just how much trouble nature was in. So he did a postgrad diploma in environmental management and then spent 5 years with Doc caring for nature on Great Barrier Island. Des drew from all those experiences to write a book called Nature's Future, Our Future. And in that, he explores our broken relationship with nature and how we might restore it. Then Des proceeds to what James Renwick, New Zealand's best-known climate scientist, calls a really exciting idea. And that is, he looks at how we can work to restore nature, especially climate, from almost any job you can think of. Des will speak on these areas, and then there'll be time for discussion. And we can take advantage from the fact that we are today a small group and cluster as a small group for you to share your own thoughts and possibly examples from your own working lives that are relevant to the experiences that Des will be talking about. So we welcome both your questions and also your comments and contributions to these ideas. And at the end, I'll tell you how you can connect further with Des's ideas. And also just note that this presentation is being recorded. So over to you, Des.
Thank you, Joanna, and welcome to you all for coming to this webinar. And a special thanks to Nelson Tasman Climate Forum and to you, Marlene and Louise and Joanna for organising it. And at the outset, I want to say that the ideas are about hope and opportunity and solutions. It's very hard to talk about the environmental situation and not be negative. There's a lot of negative about it, but My talk and certainly the book is hopefully geared towards hope. And basically, although I'm running into a lot of people who seem to have given up, even surprises me, some people, the position is it's much too early to give up. Just before we start, I can't see everybody on the screen. Is that that's probably my lack of technology this end. I've just got some of you.
It may have to do with the fact that we've got the slides up.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
And
good.
that when we come to finish the slides, then we'll see everyone.
Okay, thank you. So let's. This is not just all about the book. It's very much about the situation and how it might be addressed. The book and how did it come about? I'll start there. As Joanna's been pointing out, I've worked in a number of situations over the past 40, 50 years. And what happened certainly back in the beginnings of the 80s, was this dilemma that kept raising its head with me, a contradiction. And outside my family commitments, I had two main interests in life. There was my work and there was my love of the natural world, which, as Joanna also pointed out, goes back to childhood. But there lay this huge dilemma, a contradiction. These two central and preoccupying parts of my life were so separate, so apart. They had nothing to do with each other. They certainly weren't talking to each other. So from the 80s, that dilemma kept getting bigger. Here I was counselling and doing all the sorts of things of tutoring and family therapy and justice work. And I started to think a bit more deeply about this missing link. I needed to do something about it. But what was that? But there had to be some sort of coming together, surely, about these two fundamental things in my life. And I thought of all the other occupations that I've been in, driving trucks and cranes and other things, that, again, as Joanna pointed out. But there was nothing there that brought the both areas together. The only time that there was some integration of the two was when I was working for DOC on Great Barrier Island. But these situations seem to be exceptions. I thought about all the other work arenas too, that hundreds of occupations, careers and trade and professions, services, science, and the same sort of things seem to be there. An absence of an ecological context, a tie-in with nature, was absent in occupational life. Any interest or involvement in the environment took place outside of work. And this seemed to be, well, certainly my situation, and seemed to be the situation of everybody else. So from dilemma to search for solutions. I began talking to colleagues about this. It was a time, of course, when natural world enthusiasts, and some of you will probably be very aware of that and might have been part of it too, had the same thing said of you. We were seen as tree huggers, or at least a wee bit bent, a wee bit too different. On a good day, we were branded socialists. On a bad day, we were communists. And early on, I think, some of my profession thought I had lost my rag. What's he talking about? But conversations did grow. I ran some workshops, wrote some articles, raised questions, launched some ideas at conferences, became part of a working group within the association called Tikiti Te Ao within the profession. And some changes have taken place, but we're sort of a fair way from what one of the goals of bringing those two areas of my life together, and maybe it can be transferred to all occupations. But for me, it was how do you bring both those together? To the goal would be, or the dream would be, that the Association of Counsellors, the Association of Psychotherapists, the Psychological Society, that we could come together and we could go out and we could publicly announce there is a climate crisis and that something has to be done about it, because a crash of the biosphere is not all that flash for mental health. And to get that idea across, and that it was time to, but I'll come back to that point. This linking of work and nature to our with our habitat is not an easy concept to get. We've drifted a long way from it, and people would ask the question, what does nature do? What does nature have to do, rather, with my work? That's not what I do. I'm a radiologist. I'm a lawyer. I drive trucks. I teach history. I'm a nurse, a counsellor. What's happening out there in nature isn't what my work's about. That's for someone else, for another time, for another place. And it became so clear to me that we had become seriously alienated from nature in our work environments. And it's extraordinary, I think, when one thinks about that. The natural world, the basis for all life, the ground on which all occupations and careers stand, was being ignored. And more than that, nature was being bullied, damaged, given no voice, or often just simply ignored as far as having a place in occupations and careers. So that was the dilemma and that search that I went on to make my profession, if you like, ecologically relevant. So, a missing link, work and nature, the lost relationship. Just if I can make a few comments about this. So my conclusion was to close the gap in some way, address the missing link. And central in the challenge ahead, I think, whether it's climate, extinctions, poisoning of rivers and seas, forest destruction, is to have in our work a two-pronged attach. Build, teach, do whatever the work is about, but bring into it this ecological environmental space in such a way that work and career stand side by side, equal in status, equal in operation, equal in value with nature and its needs. It's how do we do that? But that's the goal, that's the hope. And it's about building a movement within each working arena that works to care for, and in today's world, that means to possibly preserve, quite possibly to save life on the planet. How do we do this is what was the burning question for me. It was the theme running through the book. It is probably the point of difference of the book. And to get away from that, positioning our occupation and our career outside that context of a planet where life is under threat. Life on the planet is under threat. That's the starting point. So the question for me was, how does my work, my career, fit in with preventing that? And it's quite a challenge because because, as I say, it was such a new idea. They were so separate. So building a movement. Getting a whole population to move on this as a unit is probably not going to happen. It's too big and there's not the time. But I think creating movements within society's smaller units of occupational life could well be a turning point, or certainly a very big help. Imagine the impact on communities, on society, if, say, even a dozen identifiable occupations led by the associations that head them, this will be crucial, did this. They came out, even just to come out and together claim, yes, this is a time of emergency. Let's get together and do something about it. That might sound naive, but I think that's the core of what needs to happen in the workplace. Workers and that's that in that generic sense of everybody who is operating an occupation or a career. The owners, the managers, their associations, for example, Federated Farmers, Chambers of Commerce, thought bodies, plumbers, electricians, their associations, coming out and publicly declaring there is a crisis, owning their participation, claiming where they must immediately change their own situation and operation, and exhort other workplaces and occupations to do the same. And then the other step, as an organisation, as a body, challenging the big three, our political, economic and commercial systems, especially the corporates, to get a move on. I think this might have profound impact on communities. I often think of that, you know, even a dozen, even half a dozen key occupational arenas came out and did that. I think it would have a big effect on communities. So it means having that movement within each workplace first. Too much to expect? Well, I'm not sure that we have a choice anymore. Excuse me. So change or more of the same? I'll come back to the book. So that's another heading, Marlene, but that's right. Change or more of the same. Thank you. The book is written as a series of essays, and the early ones expand what I've been talking about so far. But one essay takes up the issue of the how of change and suggests a model. And it's around the ideas of innovation, advocacy, and adoption. There probably are innovators, and be interesting what you think about this. There are probably innovators and advocates now in every workplace, very different from what it was in the 70s and 80s. Raising the issues, expressing concern, talking change, perhaps putting some pressure on their associations. Advancing this though into the movement of adoption or adopters, that's often what the sticking point is. And so we're in a society, I think, at the moment in which there's a lot of discussion, a lot of concern, a lot of action, but it hasn't got that coordination that steps out as a whole body. Oh, my throat's not behaving. So how do we advance this? How do we get the whole workplace behind the moves? How to encourage majorities to move through that gate of change? Later he says, take these ideas further. But for the moment, I just want to read to you. I thought I had a copy here, but I'll get it in a minute. I want to read to you a metaphor about this change. And it's one of Angela's, that's my wife's favourite passages. Just a minute, I'll get the book. I may read from it. A metaphor sparked by memories of my early years on the family farm in South Canterbury assists in understanding the model. Shifting sheep through a narrow gate from one paddock to another, even though the feed there is considerably better, can be a challenge. Although dogs bark at the back of the mob, the sheep halt at the threat of new territory the other side of the gate. The opening, the solution, is clear, but they balk, packing tighter and tighter as pressure builds. Then one sheep, an urgency increasing behind it, fearful of the dogs and recognising the gate as an escape from both, takes the plunge and rushes through the gate. The innovator. A few more, responding to the success of the innovator's initiative, follow the lead. The advocates. The mob follows, squeezing one another against fence posts in their haste to have familiar territory behind them. The adopters. Excuse me. The metaphor parallels human resistance to securing the welfare of the natural world for following generations. With no disrespect to sheep, we are like them in a great variety of ways. Just please excuse me for a moment. I'm going to grab something for this throat of mine, which is causing me difficulty at the moment. So, one aspect of change, instead of achieving change, very often what happens, we do more of the same in understanding change processes. Sometimes doing more of the same improves things. You know, I'm cold, so I put on something warm. I'm still cold, so I do more of the same, put on another layer. Other times, more of the same is more of the problem. I am late for an appointment involving travelling from A to B. I have calculated the estimated time, but my present speed is not going to get me there in time. 5 minutes later, it's clear I'm still not going to make it, so I press my accelerator, my foot on the accelerator. More of the same not only fails because I crash by not being able to take a corner, it actually becomes the problem. It's a good example, I think, for environmental change, including the crash part of it. Politician and economist approach to climate change is a good example. In the news recently, in any discussion around political response to climate change, is think around the edges, but keep doing more of the same. And we do a similar thing, I think, in our places of work. Nature is bullied, it is damaged, it has no voice. Climate might now be seen to be an issue, but the same structures, the same mechanisms are kept in place. We do more of the same. Fossil fuels, coal, habitat, destruction, mining. It's that more of the same that we need to perhaps bring into the thinking of our workplaces. We often participate in the same sort of process at work. Do more of the same. We might talk or think about change, but it's so difficult to seemingly put it into place. And if we could go to the political, economic, and commercial worlds. Look, I just want to talk a bit about this for a moment because it is a part of the book, and it's also such the ideology under which we live our lives and have our work situations, our occupations, are so influenced by what happens in these three most powerful occupational settings of our society. There are plenty of missing links, as you will well know, in the political, economic, and commercial worlds that we hear about every day. There seems to be this a lot of evidence, just taking carefully care about the words I use, a lot of evidence that the big three, as I call them, are not going to take the issues really seriously until either they are standing deep in a crumbling habitat, which is likely to be too late, or when there is a movement of people that sufficiently challenges the many things these three are doing and not doing. Believing that solutions to the crisis can be addressed through radical change to our political, without change to our political, economic, and commercial interests is a naive belief and a powerful block. It's also a strong force running through the majority of our workplaces, certainly in my experience of work. You know, one of my favourite, and I'm not sure if favourite is a good word here, one of my favourite examples is listening to economists representing banks, government, and business explaining on TV news or midday reports or in the press the different aspects of economy, why the cost of living is high, when it will improve, why it will improve, how it will improve. Talking about interest rates and when they'll come down and why they will come down and what that means for progress. Ideas about what will keep things going, what will improve. Basically, what's necessary for their understanding of progress. And it's in these reports and discussions that there's no connection is made with the biosphere in serious trouble. A huge missing link. I remember before the election, one of the leaders, won't mention names, came out to talk to the community that I belong to. And there's a lot of discussion about the situation as he saw it, what needed to be done, said some good things about that, what the government wasn't doing. But in that whole half-hour presentation, there wasn't one mention of the word environment, sustainability, or conservation. And when I pointed that out later, he apologized. And I thought, that almost made the situation even worse, to apologize for not including this most important area. So the problem is, of course, is that we belong to an economic, political, and commercial ideology that is very clearly geared against the environment. These reports, whether they come from a politician, an economist, or the reporter himself, they start in the wrong place, and society generally does the same. If there is an environmental emergency out there, and I believe there is, then we're starting in the wrong place. We have to make the emergency the starting point. Instead of fixing on what we think we must preserve now, economically, politically, we look at a time in the distance. We start in the wrong place. So let's start, for example, with the year 2050. That crisis, that threat of collapse, it might be less by a decade or two, or it might be more than a decade or two. So instead of working hard or thinking in the present, we have to step outside that square and put ourselves in that time of, say, 2050, or is it 2060, or is it 2030? And we let that future wash over and through us, and then come back to today. Out there, if we put ourselves out there at 2050, the question will be, what will we wish we had done back then, which is now? What should we be doing now? And I think that's kind of at the core of our consciousness and lack of consciousness, that we are unable to really escape the now and look at the future. So sometimes, and I used to find that in family systems, for example, people get really stuck, and we get stuck in the now, in the present. And one of the ways to move out of that is to go fully into the future as much as we can, really let it soak into us what it means. And then in that situation, ask yourselves the question, what do I wish I'd done back there in the now? So we do this because the environmental emergency will not be resolved under our present system, because neoliberal capitalism is geared towards its demise. In our work situations, either by participation or through silence, we then end up participating in this. So if we can move into our work situations and do some of this work, then I think that's going to be easier than trying to think about it in a whole population context. It's breaking science society down into smaller units, and the units that are most directly affected by the ideology of the day as our working environments. So that I'll just leave that there, but I want to now start to apply some of this. And I do this in the book over half, well, almost half the book is around applying these ideas to specific environments, work environments. Like, for example, take education, and here I'll just speak very briefly about, give you a little idea as to some of the approach to these different occupations. Education. Education is not to be confused with knowing. The environmental crisis can be understood as being a disorder in the minds of the dominant species, not just a problem out there. Even when motivated by wanting to better the lives of people in society generally, an educated mind is often understood and measured within those society prescriptions that I've been talking about, which can be isolated from and even opposed to the needs of nature. You know, take, for example, the whole workings and history of Ivan Watkins Dow in Taranaki, created not by people who didn't know much, created by highly educated and qualified minds. The result, huge damage to environment, to human health, even death. The result, huge damage to the environment, to human health, death. And a rethink for education would be embedded in the context of environmental need and care, so that that sort of thing wouldn't have happened. So education had not spread its wings into that sort of area. So instead of nature being treated as outside any field of education, I think this is so important at a young age, but also at tertiary level, be it a science, the arts, commerce, or the humanities, the natural world would become the initial stage and lecture of all learning. Take the trades and the trade union movement. The excesses of capitalism gave rise to the unions, people seeking a line of defence for the less well-off by mediating financial return and working conditions. These same excesses have become the core of another devaluing, that of humanity's habitat. Might the trades become a force exposing the criminality which drives environmental decline, as they strive to do with the widening margins between rich and poor? This is their challenge. This can be done whatever the trade be. They are all members of a specific occupation and source of livelihood. And like everyone, they are members of a biosphere where the natural world is calling every working environment to be a partnership. Farming. Some farmers are making some changes in some areas. Regenerative farming is being talked about in some quarters and in some places being adopted. But many other farmers resist change. If ever there's an occupation and a way of life that might unite and move ahead of government and move and much of society and take a lead, maybe it's farmers, and not be trapped in complaint and resistance. They are in a unique position to influence which road the environmental emergency will take. Imagine if they came out the way we were talking about before. They walk and work the land, its seasons, and its life-giving energies. They are in a unique position to reset what has become an entrenched and risky disconnection to what's really taking place. Time now for them to break free from a historical tendency for the farming community to presume privilege. Support, yes. Exemption, no. So through the book, and now just to end, I want to make some, I quote other authors on different subjects. And so I'll just share 4 or 5 examples of this. So in the essay, for example, on accountancy, Paul Hawken on accountancy, what if our economy were not organised around the lifeless abstraction of neoclassical economics and accountancy, but around the biological realities of nature? James Hillman on mental health and psychology, my professional field. One could accuse therapeutic psychology's exaggeration of the personal interior and aggrandizing of its importance of being a systematic denial of the world out there. Psychology, so dedicated to awakening human consciousness, needs to wake up to one of the most ancient of human truths. We cannot be studied or cured apart from the planet. Thomas Merton on theology, on religion. In our present attitude, the natural world remains a commodity to be bought and sold, not a sacred reality to venerate. And Joseph Crutch on the same issue, same subject. If people destroy something replaceable made by mankind, they're called vandals. If they destroy something irreplaceable made by God, they're called developers. The legal profession is split down the middle. Those who defend the environment and those who defend policy and economy set on destroying it. Brad Jessup on this. It is unquestionable that law with its universally accepted goals of protection, recognition and equal treatment should have a role in achieving environmental justice, and it should be criticised when it does not achieve it. So there's a lot within each, all our workplaces in which we can support and things that we can challenge. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Thank you for your presence, and it'd be good to hear your ideas.
Thank you very much, Des. Those were very powerful quotations.